Good morning and welcome to our open forum. Every now and then we will have a session for our Sunday morning services where we discuss and in attempt to be encouraging to someone, especially our young adults. And so we use the Bible and we use notes and things like that, but it is open forum and the mic is pretty much open to everyone. So we'll be passing the mic from one to the other as God would lay things on our heart, and we hope that you'll enjoy this. I'm going to start with Dominique because she was the one that originally brought this word to us.
I think it was last week when I mentioned about King Cyrus and that we should go back and basically study him because he had a lot that was in common with us. And first I want to start off as he wasn't someone that was particularly a servant of God, which makes it available to everyone. It doesn't exclude anyone that God can have a call in your life. But as we read down, you'll find out what type of person he was. And like I said, God had a purpose for him even before he was even born. And so we're just going to go through and kind of pick apart different things and then, I guess, compare it and relate it to our lives. I guess I'll start reading the first page. I have a couple of them. And it says, nearly 150 years before Cyrus was born, the prophet Isaiah foretold his birth, his name, and the task that the Creator God had predetermined for him to accomplish. The Bible records that certain people are foreordained to be born and carry out specific tasks for God during their lifetime, and a few of these individuals are even named before their birth. Cyrus the Great was one of these individuals whom God had predestined to play a pivotal role in his awesome plan for humanity. And going back to last week's message when we were talking about the siege of Babylon and how God used King Cyrus to basically take over Babylon, who once had the Israelites in captivity. And God gave him a mandate to rebuild the temple and to give the people of God whatever they needed, as far as even putting it as far as a decree in the atmosphere and in their, what do you call it, their rolls, their scrolls, that this is law, this is what's supposed to be done. And I want to jump down to, further down, let's see. Well, basically it talks about Cyrus, when he was born, his grandfather, let me see if I can find his name. It's a weird name, it's Astygus, Astyages, had a dream, and it was his daughter's child in the dream that took over his empire. And so this grandfather had this, I guess, secret thing done with his servant to go and kill his grandson. Well, the servant just couldn't do it, and so he took the baby to a couple somewhere, and they couldn't do it, so they ended up raising him as their own. But what was funny when I looked a little further is after he was raised or whatever, by the time he was around 10, the grandfather realized who he was. But because of his great servanthood and his abilities, the grandfather used him for what he needed in the kingdom. And it's almost like what we sometimes find ourselves in situations. The enemy may know who we are and want to use our abilities because it makes them look good and it's beneficial for them. But in the end, he still took over the empire. And he was one of great military strategy, as far as when we go to the Word, you'll see where God promised that he would take over nations. And so he was one that was really, I guess, strategic in his planning. But the thing that made him different from other kings when they took over kingdoms, he did it with minimal amount of blood. He wasn't heinous, I guess. And he was very open to, when he took over nations, that they would continue their customs. They were allowed to continue their religious practices and things like that. And he just pretty much was open to, he didn't shut anybody down. Yeah, he took over, but he was pretty much somebody that was of a good nature, and that's why he's so well respected. On one of these things I have, when it talks about his personality, it says, Cyrus the Great achieves highest rank among all world leaders throughout human history because of the following reasons. And it says high moral and ethical values. He created a Persian empire based on ethics. He expanded the ethical empire to include all men who wish to join it. It says that he's famous for freeing the Jewish captives in Babylonia and allowing them to return to their homeland. It says establishing a constitution and judicial system based on high moral and ethical values. The freedoms of religion, job, place of residency, being an advocate of freedom of choice for 2,500 years. What else? He's a religious tolerance, and he created gold and silver coins for trading. He ordered all governors to treat people as their own children, and no one could be executed for a first-time crime. So he was just an all-around good-natured person, and there's a lot more. It says to avoid loss of life, he ordered special clothing for those workers who were working with stones, and even though he wasn't, they say he was a pagan king, but he had something different about him when he came here, and it just put me in mind that you don't have to be the one that was, I guess, birthed into a family where this is like how we are. Some things we got because we were just born into it. But God He takes people from many different aspects of life, and He can make you great. He has a purpose for us to get things done. And so just looking at Him and seeing the great things that He did, even outside of the whole thing of religion, but as far as His heart, where is your heart in this thing? So
in the first section of it, where it talks about Cyrus as the man, who he was, and his attributes and everything, it really stuck out to me that God fashioned him for this. Like she said, he wasn't necessarily a religious king. He wasn't necessarily one who served God, but God, it said 150 years before he was born, he prophesied that this man was going to set his people free. He fashioned this man to be this way so that when he did take over, he let his people go, let them continue their customs, let them worship their God. And it's back at Jeremiah 29:11 where God says, I know the thoughts that I think towards you. Thoughts of, Thoughts of peace and not of evil to give you an expected end. Even though God may not have written and prophesied our destinies and who we're supposed to be in this word, God knows who we're supposed to be. God fashioned us for a specific purpose that He knows about. So we have to make sure we're taking that which God has given us and using it for His glory or for whatever it is He called us to do.
Go over to Isaiah 44. And it kind of tripped me out because Isaiah is behind Ezra and all that, but actually it was before, how the Bible was mixed up. But this is when he was prophesying Cyrus. So I'm going to start at 44:21, and it says, Remember these, O Jacob and Israel, for thou art my servant. I have formed thee. Thou art my servant, O Israel. Thou shalt not be forgotten of me. I have blotted out as a thick cloud thy transgressions, and as a cloud thy sins. Return unto me, for I have redeemed thee. Sing, O ye heavens, for the Lord hath done it. Shout, ye lower parts of the earth. Break forth into singing, ye mountains, O forests, and every tree therein. I mean, nobody's left out. For the Lord hath redeemed Jacob, and glorified himself in Israel. Thus saith the Lord, thy Redeemer, and he that formed thee from the womb. I am the Lord that maketh all things, that stretcheth forth the heavens alone, that spreadeth abroad the earth by myself. Meaning He's taking this is me. No one else can do it. That frustrateth the tokens of the liars, and maketh diviners mad, that turneth wise men backward, and maketh their knowledge foolish. Now, this is what God is talking about. We talk about He's our reward and how He's capable. People, we see some situations right now where it's like it just doesn't make any sense, and they can't give you a audible explanation of what is going on. It says, that confirmeth the word of His servant, and performeth the counsel of His messengers, that saith to Jerusalem, Thou shalt be inhabited, and to the cities of Judah ye shall be built, and I will raise up the decayed places thereof. And this is Him prophesying that the temple will be rebuilt. And it says, Thus says to the deep, Be dry, and I will dry up thy rivers. That saith of Cyrus, He is my shepherd, and shall perform all my pleasure, even saying to Jerusalem, Thou shalt be built, and to the temple thy foundation shall be laid. And going down to 45, and this is when God commissioned Cyrus. And it says, thus saith the Lord to his anointed. And he's calling Cyrus his anointed. And once again, we're going back saying he wasn't necessarily a servant of God. But he is calling him his anointed. And we talk about speak those things that be not as though they were. And it says, whose right hand I have holden. And we know right hand is symbolic of power. And it says, to subdue nations before him. And I will loose the loin of kings to open before him the two leaden gates, and the gates shall not be shut. I will go before thee and make the crooked places straight. I will break in pieces the gates of brass and cut in sunder the bars of iron. And I will give thee the treasures of darkness and hidden treasures of secret places, that thou mayest know that I, the Lord, which called thee by thy name, am the God of Israel. And I thought that was so funny because we talk about the right hand being symbolic of power. And when it's talking about making those crooked places straight and breaking into pieces the gates of brass. Now we know how difficult, that is. So if he's anointed him to go and do this, meaning God has him, and I think because he wasn't necessarily a servant of God, he didn't get the whole thing. Lord, well, how? You know how we get in this thing of how are we gonna do this? Because then we get in ourselves, and then we let fear set. And he just was somebody that really didn't know, and he did what he was supposed to do. And then even when it talks, go back up to 45:1, it says to subdue nations before him, and I will loose the loins of kings. And when you think about that, it's like loose the loin, meaning his seed, everything would have to surrender to this man. And how awesome of an honor it is for him to feel that God feels that Cyrus is capable and worthy enough to, I guess, be over this.
Now listen to this. Even when you say he was with his family at first, and then when his grandfather had that dream, and because his grandfather didn't want him to usurp his power, then he sent him away and sent him somewhere else. So it looks like that Cyrus was born into the right family, but the enemy got in it, and so he was sent to another family. But even in that, when God has a plan for your life, he knows where you are. He knows how to find you. He'll go to the most remote places to find you. And even though Cyrus might not have grown up in the environment that he necessarily should have grown up in, God still anointed him, because the destiny that when God fashioned him, the destiny that was upon his life still remained in him. So God knows where to find us. And we can go even through situations just much like Joseph. We can go through situations in life, but when God says, I know the plans that I think towards you, he talks about plans to do you good and not evil, to bring you to an expected end. If we live our life, we're still going to get to our expected end. Now, I do believe in Cyrus's case, he made a decision, because I'm quite sure once his grandfather found out who he was, maybe there was some talk in the kingdom of who Cyrus really was. Now, he had a choice to be who God called him to be, or be angry because of what happened to him. And I believe he made the right choice.
And I think, because it's not a lot that you have to go back and search in history, but one of the articles I read, it talked about when he was brought back into the kingdom until he was about 10 to 12. His grandfather allowed him and his mother to still be apart, but they were kind of exiled, so they were still kind of pushed.
So he
to
did
the side.
understand who he was.
Okay. So I guess, because remember, he wanted him killed. He didn't want him sent away. And so I guess when his grandfather had to actually deal with, oh my God. And then just imagine the shame, I guess, when everybody knew, well, what happened to him? He just came up missing.
What really stands out is that in all this, Cyrus did nothing wrong. In all this, Cyrus did nothing wrong. It was people, outside people that exiled him and, went through situations because of people's decisions and everything. I think that's why he walked in prominence in God. He walked in prominence in grace and dignity. Even in his prominence, he was a great ruler. He thought about people. He had a heart for people. So never reading about Cyrus and everything, but last week when we talked about Cyrus, it's like I've never read about Cyrus, never even heard about him. But it's always people.
Cyrus the Great?
You hear, but you just don't know who he is. And I think there was even a cartoon, one of the cartoon messages, or Christian cartoons we had, it was about Cyrus the Great. But it's always seemed God takes not the base thing, but the small thing.
Which is
that
the
makes
best
it
thing.
great.
Which is the best thing.
Yeah, well, I don't know how he was as a person. You know, he comes from prominence. He's obviously was born into prominence, but even him being exiled and everything, it's always what the people we don't see, the people that we don't know about, people we don't expect, that God uses so mightily. Because even the way they spoke about him as a king, as he was in rulership, that's totally different than what you see in the Bible. It's like totally contrary to what we're used to. And about even God's chosen David, totally contrary to the life of David, to the rule of David. That's what stood out to me. It's like God can use anybody.
But even think about David and his brothers. When David, I mean, he was like a little scrub on the backside of the mountain. And even when he came forth, they talked about him and said, "What are you doing here? You're only supposed to bring our lunch. Give us our lunch and basically go back." And they talked about David being a ruddy man. They talked about him not being. Now you think about he came forth in the reign of Saul, who was a king, and he was a grand stature, and here comes this little ruddy little guy. So God, a lot of times I think God uses people that may not be so much into themselves, because one thing about being a little insecure in yourself, then you're not so arrogant, and God can really use you because you recognize from the beginning that it's not about me, it's about God. You recognize, Lord, I don't know what I'm doing, and Lord, I can't do this without you, I need you. So I think a lot of it has to do with the attitude of the heart. When he talks about taking the base thing, the base things always feels like base things know they're base thing, don't they? They know that they're base thing, so they have a different attitude of heart.
And because of Cyrus' attitude, God was able to prophesy that he would basically go into these nations with ease and conquer them. Like he conquered the most rebellious nation. There's Egypt, Ethiopia, the Chaldeans, these people that did not serve God. They were astrologers and served other gods, but he was able to go in and to conquer them and to conquer their riches and their nations with ease because God prophesied it.
Right here it says that he basically paving the way for all the victories and policies that God's will and his plan will move forward regardless of whatever the situation is. Meaning there's no stopping it. And there may be some times where things are slowed down, but you can't stop it. It says God is in control. Light, darkness, peace, or calamity. None of these things happen without his permission. We don't catch God off guard. Oh, I have different ones.
Okay, so you said light, darkness,
Peace or calamity.
peace or calamity. God is still in
Cannot
control,
happen.
and you don't catch God off guard. The Bible says it talks about we're troubled on every side, and it talks about we don't get in despair. So the Bible says that troubles are going to come. Even as they came to Cyrus' life, troubles are going to come in our life. It says we're going to be persecuted, but not forsaken, cast down, not destroyed. We don't have to lose hope because we know that God is he's sovereign and he's still in control. In this situation, even though there was what the enemy meant for evil, again, God turned it around for good. Because I don't know what happened between the time that the boy was pretty much exiled and the time that he was brought back, because it really didn't.
It doesn't. That's what it doesn't have it in the Bible. You have to go on the history books and things like that. But it just said that at some point in time, his grandfather just realized who he was. So I don't know. You know, we talked yesterday about whatever you are as a child. That's who you are. And so maybe there was some attributes of Cyrus when the boy got around. He was like, wait a minute. It's a little eerie. He's a little bit too familiar. And so when he realized that, then that's when he made his way into the kingdom to do some things.
Did mighty things.
And then it talks about his grandfather knowing who he is, but even in here it says, imagine Cyrus's amazement and sober contemplation as he became aware of Cyrus's prophecy and realized that almost 150 years before his birth, he had been named and ordained by the God of the Israelites to become a mighty conquering king.
Now, isn't that something?
You know, and like,
that's a little.
and I imagine it was a time where it wasn't something he knew for, way off. He knew he was conquering people, and I'm assuming probably when he came into the camp of the Israelites, and they started saying, oh, this is Cyrus the Great. This is the man that God's been talking about. The Bible talks about write the vision and make it plain. When you know the vision, you know, okay, now I have a different mindset about this thing. I got a different intrepidness about this thing because, okay, this is who God says I am. This may not be my God, but if I'm feeling these attributes, they said it's who I am, and I am doing what they're saying, you know what, then what kind of a dogmatic spirit you have behind that.
I was really taken back by his, I guess, the way that he conquered these places. Because we know, first of all, kings, they're the highest ranking person in that area. And it's like, they can have some ways about them. They can be pretty arrogant. Think about it, we looking at people and they're arrogant. It's like, well, why are you arrogant? And so these kings, when they get into situations, they just take things and the way they do things is just not right. And so for him, even that he conquered these places, but how he made sure that there was minimal blood loss, and he really didn't want to fight with people. They just, he would come in and take over and hope that, basically in hopes that you didn't really fight too much against it, because he came deep. I think there was one where it talks about his soldiers were like the waters. So it reminded me on 300 where you just looked, you heard this noise and you looked and it was just all these people. And so I can imagine that's how his army was. And so it was like, please just surrender so we don't even have to come in and just wreak havoc.
Somewhere in some, I don't know where it is in Psalm where it says the kings, it mentions that the kings will bow down to you. And they not know part of the remnant. And it seems like Cyrus is part of the remnant. The kings will bow down to you. They will succumb to you. They don't even know why they are, but their power of God, the anointing on your life that causes them to. Where does it say this?
When it says kings shall be your nursing fathers and queens shall be your nursing mothers.
Okay.
Okay, and now when she was saying the power that he walked in, I think it's in Romans where it talks about that every power that is given is a power given by God. And even so we have kings and authorities and dignitaries and presidents and things like that, but they are still subject to the great I am. They're still subject to the great I am. And I think what makes a great ruler is a ruler that will bow his knee before the Lord. Because God knows how to govern, I won't even say his people, he knows how to govern his creation. We sung that song, I think, when Amber was pregnant, she was talking about, you basically told the clouds where to stand and where the stars where to stand and the ocean. Don't you come any further than this. Because God, from the beginning of time, he has set forth laws and things like that. So any king that are dignitary that's in power first need to acknowledge that the only reason that I have this power is because God gave me this power or this authority.